Wow, I do feel like a rock star. Move this one here. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, Lee, for this super kind introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. Like you, I also live next to the St. Lawrence River, but at the opposite end of it, in Quebec City, where strange people speak French and they shovel snow all year long. And for your information, we did not get any flooding in Quebec City. Usually we can get some flooding, but it's usually coming from the tide. So it's a different type of problem. So I'm here today to talk about green marine. I'm curious, how many of you have heard about green marine before? Please raise your hand. Okay, well, not many. I'm not surprised. I think we've been around for about 10 years, but I realize that we really need to do some more reaching out. So this is very timely. Glad to be here today for that reason. Okay, so I'll start this presentation with a Green Marine 101 section, who we are and what we do, and then move on to explain our certification process. In the third section, I'll focus on the tangible results after 10 years of implementation. And finally, I'll brief you very shortly on our current priorities and future opportunities. So Green Marine is a voluntary certification program with the goal of reducing the environmental footprint of the industry, because there's an important footprint from the industry. That's the first thing to recognize. So it's based on two fundamental principles. Everything we do goes beyond compliance, and we promote a culture of continuous improvement. Green Marine is also a benchmarking tool, so it will allow companies to compare with other companies where they are. And finally, and maybe it's the most unique aspects of Green Marine, it's also a partnership involving stakeholders. So really here, there's a long-term collective goal to improve the relationship between the industry and stakeholders, like, and I mean here, environmental groups, governments, academia. Now, I just want to be clear about what Green Marine is not. It's not a communication campaign. There is a communication component to Green Marine because we're trying to highlight and showcase the best practices in terms of sustainability. And you know, demonstrating good environmental stewardship is an important part of maintaining social license. And of course, that's one of our goals with this program. But communications without substance, that's called greenwashing. And that's the last thing I want to do. I firmly believe that if you want to look good, you need to do good. So that's why one of our objectives really is to genuinely improve the environmental performance of the industry. And that's where the certification program comes in. I'll talk about it in a few minutes. Green Marine doesn't do any lobbying. We don't have a mandate to represent our members. We don't take positions on new laws or regulations. And finally, we're not a forum to debate on government regulation or specific projects or policy issues. Anything that is outside the scope of the program. So for example, oil pipelines and terminals on the West Coast, management of the water levels on the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes, I mean, those are policy issues. They can't be dealt with at the individual company level. So that's outside the scope of this program. A few words on the organization itself. We are a nonprofit organization incorporated in both Canada and the United States. We have a similar structure as an association where participants are members. The funding comes entirely from those members. So there's no government subsidy or grant. We have a small secretariat with a staff of 6 people. That's including me. And we have the main office in Quebec City and two small offices in Halifax and Seattle. Green Marine was launched in 2007 with about 30 companies on board. So on this map, you can see every red dot is a port, a blue dot, a shipowner, and a purple dot, terminal. So it was binational right from the start. We had the US Seaway and a few American ports joining the program on day one. And initially, it was intended exclusively for the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes region. But it proved to be successful pretty quickly. It didn't take long before other ports and companies from outside the region asked to be certified as well. It was not the plan, but was there a good reason to say no to those companies? Because, you know, more participants means more credibility, more visibility. So we said yes, and I guess that's the result. So the number of certified companies and ports has more than tripled in 10 years. As you can see on the map, it was very, very popular on the West Coast, especially in the Seattle and the Vancouver area. And today, Green Marine is the largest environmental certification program in North America for the maritime sector. So we're very, very proud of this accomplishment, especially since it was not our objective at all 10 years ago. So right now we have 117 certified participants, 30 shipowners, 41 ports, and 46 terminals. There are other certification schemes in the maritime industry, but none of them covers so much ground, and none of them has so much diversity in the membership. For example, we cover all types of shipowners, tugs, ferries, containers, bulk carriers. For almost 10 years, there's been one important category of shipowners missing: the lake carriers on the American side. But that has changed just a few months ago when Interlake joined Green Marine, followed by Great Lakes Towing a few weeks later. So for me, this is a very significant development. I think it will help us greatly being more effective in the Great Lakes. Initially, the Green Marine membership was stronger. We had a lot more members on the Canadian side. What Lana said previously about the Canadians and relationship to government, I think that's accurate, that's true. It's even true between companies and government. So initially we had direct support from the government for that initiative. So that helped, it gave an incentive for companies to join. So right now, all Canadian port authorities are Green Marine certified, but we have a pretty good momentum right now on the American side as well. So thanks to a great partnership with the American Association of Port Authorities, many of them have joined in the past 2 or 3 years. So right now, as you can see, there's an almost equal number of American ports and Canadian ports. Well, I think by the end of the year, we'll probably have a majority of American ports. So we also have almost 50 terminals in this program. It's the highest number of company for a category of members in more than 80 locations, and again, very diversified. Gigantic companies, smaller ones, all types of cargo. Okay, now you know who we are. Let's move to the program itself and the certification process. When a company joins Green Marine, it commits to rate its environmental performance in specific area. So the scope of the program was a bit more narrow when it was launched, targeting only a few priority issues. Of course, of chief importance was invasive species, air emissions, and community impacts. We've been expanding the program ever since, including issues like waste management, PM emissions, dry bulk handling, spill prevention, and most recently, underwater noise. So yes, I will talk about whales. So this is really an ever-evolving program, and the decision to add or remove an environmental issue to address, it really comes from our multi-stakeholder advisory committees. I'll tell you more about it in a few minutes. So this is how we measure the environmental performance of each of our participants for each environmental issue. So it's a very simple 1 to 5 scale system where the baseline is level 1, regulation, the monitoring of regulation, because above that, everything is beyond regulation. So at level 2, you have mostly the low-hanging fruits, things that are not too difficult to implement and not too costly. At level 3, we ask companies to measure their environmental impact. And at levels 4 and 5, well, it becomes more difficult, more costly, more ambitious. So that's where we ask them to introduce new technologies or reach reduction targets. Those criteria, especially at level 5, they need to be ambitious, challenging, but achievable. So our participants really appreciate this system because it's very easy to understand and easy to communicate. So here's an example of such performance indicator. This is a simplified version of our indicator on greenhouse gases. So at level 2, we have the easier stuff like document fuel consumption, have the speed reduction measures and preventive engine maintenance. Then at level 3, if they want to reach it, they need to do an annual GHG emissions inventory. And then using this data from the inventory to reach level 4 and 5, they need to demonstrate an annual reduction in intensity of 1% at level 4 and 2% at level 5. So here are just a few more examples of program requirements. Those are for ports. So you have things like limit the engine idling, the sampling of noise emission, dust emissions, project to provide public access to shorelines. So this is just a quick glance. There are more than 100 such requirements in the program. This is an overview of the certification process itself. So each participants need to submit a self-evaluation every year. And then this self-evaluation needs to be verified by an independent verifier every second year. Then the results need to be published on the Green Marine website, and that leads to the certification itself. So here's what our self-evaluation guide looks like. So you see a list of requirements, and the company just clicks whether they do it or they don't, or if it's not applicable. So that's all available on our website. Transparency is a super important principle of Green Marine, and we are kind of unique out there with that. I mean, when we compare with other certification schemes like that, everything I'm showing you today is on our website, the requirements of the program as well as the results. Another area where there's been big change in our 10-year history is the verification process. Nobody has much confidence in a self-reporting system. I knew I would get some laugh from that. So the verification part is really crucial for Green Marine's credibility. We had to invent this from scratch, and we started with one verifier for the entire membership 10 years ago. When the number of participants started to increase, we also increased the number of verifiers from 1 to 2, then to 11, and finally to 26 right now, covering all regions of North America. We put in place a formal recruiting, training, and accreditation process also for our verifiers. So continual improvement is not only for our members, it's for the organization itself. And this is how the results are published. That's something you can find in our reports and on the website. So for each company gets a number between 1 and 5 for each environmental issue. So very simple and transparent. We were not sure 10 years ago that companies would actually appreciate being compared with other companies. We expected some pushback, but it went well. And after 2 or 3 years, we realized that we had a system of friendly competition with that. And it's really working. So let's move to the third part of the presentation. After 10 years of implementation, what have we accomplished? So this graph shows the average result of all participants for all environmental issues from 2008 to 2016. So the curve shows you that the average was 2 out of a possible 5 in 2008 when the program was launched, and it was 3.1 in 2016. So this may look like we reached a plateau and we kind of stopped improving. Well, that's not the case, because the columns show the number of new participants in the program. So as new participants come in, they tend to have lower result. So just maintaining this average actually shows some kind of improvement. And the program is now a lot more difficult than it was 8 or 10 years ago. We've added, we've revised it so many times, added new performance indicators, dealt with new environmental issues. So it's much more ambitious right now. So I think this shows that Green Marine is successful in promoting sustainable practices on a very large scale in the shipping industry. It's great to be able to measure our participants' progress with numbers, as I just did, but I don't think that's our most important accomplishment. I believe that our most important accomplishment was to bring about a culture of dialogue between the industry and its stakeholders on environmental issues. So Green Marine is not only a certification program, it's a partnership initiative involving stakeholders. Really, it offers a unique opportunity to companies and NGOs to talk to each other and work together. When the program was first designed, the selection, of the initial set of priorities, issues, and requirements, it was made by a committee of about 20 people from all sectors, all industry sectors, but the NGOs, government, and academia as well. Everything was adopted by consensus. Of course, it took more than 2 weeks. That means 2 years. But this initial committee became one of our 3 advisory committees. We have one in Quebec, in French, one in the Great Lakes, and one on the West Coast. Those advisory committees, they really represent the core mechanism of Green Marine. And more than that, they're the soul of the program. So their role is to make recommendations about program revisions to our board of directors. I can't recall any single recommendation that was not accepted by the board of directors. So really, those committees, that's where things happen. So even after 10 years, all program changes, believe it or not, they've all been adopted by consensus. As I said, sometimes it's long, but the final result is a lot more credible. So this is the membership of our Great Lakes Advisory Committee. As you can see, we have a good mix of Canadian and US ports and companies, as well as representation from government, NGOs, and research. So this group meets twice a year, once in Toronto and once in Cleveland. We currently have only one environmental group there, World Wildlife Fund. I think this is not enough. Usually on each committee we try to have 2 or 3. I mean, it makes the discussion much more interesting, much more dynamic. Yeah, a lot more fun. And their role is really, really important. They help us keep on track and make sure that this program is challenging enough. But it's hard to find organizations that are interested enough in this specific topic of shipping and the environment. And sometimes it can get pretty technical. So in the past, we had an excellent collaboration with Great Lakes United. Probably that you know about that group. They were part of our committee, but the group was disbanded about 2 or 3 years ago. So the fact that Green Marine is an open, transparent, and inclusive initiative, of course, it boosts its credibility tremendously. And let's be honest here. What do you really think when you hear voluntary industry environmental initiative? And I won't say any bad word on the stage. But even personally, I'm immediately skeptical. I need to be convinced it's not phony. This is usually the first reaction we get also when we approach NGO stakeholders. But once they see how we work and they realize that they can have a real input in the development of the program, well, they usually change their mind. I mean, you can see on this slide, this is a small sample of our supporters. So organizations who are formally supporting Green Marine. And you can see some pretty high-profile organizations there. Some of them are really, really careful with their brand. I mean, if they support a phony initiative, it hurts them. So they don't do that. So I think the fact that they decided to support Green Marine, it shows we were able to develop a credible program. And just as an example, one of the most fruitful collaborations that we had and that we still have is with WWF. They became officially supporter of Green Marine in 2010. And since then, they've been a standing member on 2 of our committees, the Great Lakes Committee and the West Coast Committee. There are really great mutual benefits from this organization. Obviously, for us, the fact that they're endorsing Green Marine, it cannot hurt the credibility of the initiative, of course. And on networking and partnership, just as an example, they were able to have many projects individually with some of our members. I recall one coming from just a discussion at our conference between a WWF representative and a FedNav manager. And so it led to a very strong partnership to develop best practices for navigation in the Arctic. But the most obvious benefit for WWF, however, was to have a real influence on the future and the development of this program. Through the advisory committees, they advocated the development of new performance indicator to address underwater noise and protection of marine mammals. So this is why we started working on this in 2014 by forming a binational and multi-sectoral work group who had the mandate to develop new performance indicators. And after 2 years of development, we were really proud to release those new performance indicators. They were welcomed and praised by the Canadian government and by WWF as well. And it was praised as a world first, because really this is the first time that the shipping industry voluntarily accepts to have its environmental performance measured with regard to underwater noise. So in my introduction, when I presented Green Marine as a partnership, this is probably one of the best demonstrations we have of that. Ship strikes, underwater noise, protection of marine mammals, of course, maybe not a priority topic in the Great Lakes right now, unless you've seen whales recently floating by, I don't know. However, 10 years ago, this was not even on our radar screen. It was not even mentioned when we looked at the priority issues that we needed to address. So things are evolving very quickly. Underwater noise, we know it hurts marine mammals. But I saw articles, I saw scientists telling us that, you know, maybe not just whales, other aquatic life as well. Who knows? This could be an issue in 5-6 years from now in the Great Lakes as well. We're going to be ready to work on this if it comes to it. Another area where we had tangible results is with greenhouse gas emissions. So we collected some data from our participants in 2017. We wanted to see what progress was made since the inception of the program. It turned out this was more complicated than anticipated. The intensity, GHG intensity, is not measured the same way for bulk carriers than it is for tugs or ferries. But in the end, we found out that the average GHG intensity reduction is 1.4% per year, which is pretty good, considering that, especially in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region, you have companies operating older vessels. So we're not claiming that this is all due to green marine. There are other factors having an influence here, fleet renewal and new technologies. But to me, it's clear that you know, the voluntary requirements of the program played an important role in these results. And let me just remind you that none of those companies has any obligation to report GHG data. So without green marine, they just wouldn't do it at all. For the last part of my presentation, I'd like to focus just on some of our near future priorities. I must confess that in recent years, we may have dedicated less time to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region as we used to do in the first years. I mean, the membership expansion to other regions and the development of new performance indicators, that took a lot of our time and attention. But I think right now there's a star alignment for us to refocus on the region where green marine was born. Recently, you may have heard that the 8 states and 2 provinces of the Great Lakes region formally encouraged participation in the Green Marine program in their marine transportation strategy. And since then, the Great Lakes Commission and the Conference of Premiers and Governors reached out to us to discuss how we could measure the improvements, how we can measure the impact of the shipping industry and in the Great Lakes. So I'm pretty convinced that we'll be able to play a greater role in the years to come, especially with the American shipowners now on board. Just in terms of program review and development, just a few issues that we'll be looking at that might be of interest to you. In the past 20 years, we've talked a lot about invasive species. I mean, we focused a lot on the zebra mussels and anything that could be introduced by ballast water. Several measures have been put in place or are being put in place. And now the attention is turning to another possible vector of introduction, biofouling, which is the accumulation of microorganisms on ship hulls. So we'll probably be looking at developing criteria for that. Ship recycling is another issue we're looking at. We don't want old ships to end up on a beach in Bangladesh. And finally, maybe most interesting for you is what we want to do on community relations. It turns out that social acceptability has become a big concern for several of our port members. Major infrastructure projects are at risk of being delayed or even canceled if there's not enough social acceptability. So it's already happening in a number of places, and our port members want to be guided in how they can improve that. So to deal with that, we do the same as usual. We invited environmental groups to form a work group to look at what measure could be proposed. So to be honest, this will be a tough one. We're already facing challenges. I mean, just defining the basic concepts. What is a community? What is social acceptability? This is proving pretty difficult. We have a very wide variety of ports in this program, 40 of them, in very different regions and very different views on the topics. This being said, we've been there before. When we started our work on underwater noise, it was not a walk in the park. There were some fierce debates, but we made it to consensus, and I'm pretty sure that we'll make it again to consensus. Over the past 10 years, our reputation has been growing constantly, not only here, but outside North America. We're not the only sustainability, marine industry sustainability initiative out there, but our transparent and inclusive model is unique, and people are noticing. So we've been receiving in the past 2 and 3 years a couple of requests from ports and companies from all over the place, from many different countries. So they want to be certified. So far, we said, well, thank you, but no, that's a North American program. This is something that is currently being reconsidered by our board of directors. I think we clearly have a model that works well, and there could be good value in exporting it. This is exciting, but you know, it's a big leap, and we won't rush any decision for that. And in the short term, really, our intention is to stay focused on our core regions. So to conclude this presentation, let me briefly mention our annual conference. And as Lee mentioned, it's a 2-day conference. It focuses exclusively on marine transport and sustainability. Of course, you're all welcome to attend, even though this year you might find it a bit far from here. It will be in Vancouver. But next year, in 2019, we'll be back in the Great Lakes. The conference will be in Cleveland. So hopefully a few of you will be interested and will make it there. So this is my last slide. I hope I was not too dry for a Saturday morning, and I know I'm standing between you and lunch. That's such a tough spot. So I hope I was able to present this initiative in an interesting way. I invite you to stay in touch and just be aware of what we're doing, so you can subscribe to our newsletter or our Twitter account. And if you're interested in more in-depth articles, we also have a magazine that is free and online. So I thank you very much for your attention. It will be my pleasure to answer a few questions if you're not too hungry.